This video is about native warm season grasses and their management in the summer, their grazing specifically in the summer. We're going to answer questions like, why is this wrong? Looks beautiful. Why is this not the best management that we could do? And we're going to give you some tips and tricks to have successful grazing of your native warm season grasses. Let's get started. Really good summer grazing of native warm season grasses begins back in the spring. There's a whole separate video that addresses that, and you should definitely check that out, especially if you haven't seen it yet or if you are back in the spring. But the Cliff Notes version of that is really that if we wait too long to start up in the summer, we lose production, we lose quality. So we get a lot of knockdown, and that's why I'm here in this area right now, is because this is an area where it was really tall when we put the stock in here, and we've got a lot of knockdown on it. And so that's gonna make this grass have to start over again from the root reserves. That's really hard on it. So don't wait too long to start. You'll also lose protein concentration, increase fiber. Not a good thing as far as forage quality. And then two, just keep in mind that there's a huge growth spurt on these things. When it starts to warm up and then it gets warm, boy, are they growing. The further we get into summer, it's just their natural growth peak, growth cycle, is that they decrease in their production. And so good summer grazing of your warm seasons starts back in the spring. There's a concept that it takes grass to grow grass, meaning if you don't have any leaf area left after you graze it, then there's nothing to fuel the regrowth except the root reserves, which is really hard on the plant. There's another way to phrase that, which is tall grasses must be managed tall. Why is that? Well, the reason for that is that these grasses obviously get tall, but they have a growing point, fancy word is apical meristem, that is taller, that is higher off the ground than our shorter grasses. I've got my big blue stem clump here, and you can see that this is a lot of stem down here and a lot of leaf blade up here. When we graze this, what we want to do is we want our cow to come in, take some of this forage off the leaf blade, but leave leaf area. And this plant can recover much, much quicker because it's like, oh, well, that was inconvenient, but I can have those grown back in a week or two, no big deal. So as opposed to if we graze it off at ground level and we graze the stem part off, which is not very good quality, but if we graze that off, the plant has to start back totally from root reserves. If we just remove a little bit from the top, remove half the plant, a third of the plant probably doesn't even have to draw on those root reserves at all, which is wonderful because it can keep just chugging right along, and we're going to get more production out of our plant that way. So tall grasses need to be managed high, and I mentioned that meristem. Let's look at a drawing of one of those just to get in our heads what it is. In this figure, which you can find in the native grass forages for the eastern United States, but originally came from Lee Mansky at North Dakota State University, you can see an illustration of a grass tiller. A grass tiller is a fancy word for like a stem of grass. And there on the left, we've got our tiller or stem of grass, and it's got its stem and of course the leaf blades coming off of it. But then if we blow up that one little area in the circle on that tiller and we look inside of it, then we see what we see over there on the right. And of course you can't see this with the naked eye, like you have to cut into it. And that's why an illustration is such a beautiful thing here. But you can see you've got this growth point, that little apical meristem as it's labeled, and it is where the rest of your growth is going to come from. Or these meristems themselves, the leaf buds in the meristem, that's where the future growth for this plant is coming from. So if we graze that off, goodbye to a lot of production. So again, it's just another way of looking at how this plant looks inside to think about managing high. And again, we're not really losing forage production by managing high. In fact, you'll gain production because the plant is healthier. So it's a long-term game. We don't want the short-term gains. We want long-term.
We want enough canopy to collect the sunlight. We want enough canopy to kind of shade out a lot of the weed encroachment, but at the same time, we want to graze enough so that we keep our warm season grass productive and vegetative for as long as we can. So if we don't harvest any of the forage, we would have an excellent canopy height, but we will go reproductive on the plant, lose our vegetative. It won't be as vegetative and it won't be regrowing. So we wouldn't get as many grazing days just letting it grow up and graze it one time late in the season. So we want to graze this periodically, but we also want to maintain a certain amount of canopy. So what we're looking at, there's a chart in Pat Kaiser's book that I'd like to share with you with some recommended grazing heights of different native warm season grasses. So you see on your chart there, this is there's a column called Grazing Approach, and you have rotational and continuous grazing. Of course, rotational would be where you rotate in, do a rest period, rotate out, rotating in and out throughout the year multiple times. Continuous grazing would be more of a set stock approach where we just fence off a field, we put X number of head of livestock in there, and they stay in there until we remove them late in the fall. No rotating in or out, more of a continuous graze. So that's the difference between those two in the chart, and you'll notice that the height recommended to maintain changes with the style of management. Over on the left side of your chart, you have species. So you've got switchgrass, and it's separated into two types, upland switchgrass and lowland switchgrass. Lowland switchgrasses are Alamo and Canlow. They get quite a bit taller, so you notice a higher grazing height on those. The upland switchgrasses get about half as tall as the lowlands. That would be Cave and Rock, Nebraska, Missouri Eco-type, those type of switchgrasses. You also then have big blue stem and Indian grass and eastern gamma grass. So to look at the chart there of what happens with each species on the switchgrasses, in rotational grazing, you're supposed to maintain a 15 to 30 inch height on lowland switchgrasses. 18 to 24 if you're continuous grazing. Upland types is 12 to 26 inches tall, and on continuous 14 to 18 inches tall. Big blue stem and Indian grass are 13 to 26 inches tall, and on continuous it's 14 to 18 inches tall. Eastern gamma grass is a 16 to 32 on rotational, and 18 to 22 on continuous. So as you look at that chart there, that's kind of some recommendations of how to graze. Of course, if you get your stocking rate wrong, or you're high or you're low, it's not the end of the world. You just try to adapt and change as you go along. On continuous grazing, one thing we notice a lot is patchiness of a graze. So we're talking about grazing these within that range, but keep in mind there'll be patches that the livestock hardly touch in a continuous grazing system. They'll graze some shorter than others, and it has to do with the growth point. Where they eat the first time is where they're more likely to eat the second time and the third time. So that kind of is what causes that patchiness of a graze. In a rotational grazing system, you hardly ever see that patchiness unless you don't have much livestock on an area and you're moving them really quickly. Otherwise, you tend to not have that patchiness. We're in a big blue stem field, and when we're in to talk about, there was an old rule that said you could graze native warm season grasses down to about 8 inches. And it's not a bad rule per se, and definitely your big blue stem and little blue stem will tolerate and survive that type of grazing. But what I want to show you is, you see all the bare ground around me here. This native grass was grazed down. This is big blue stem. It was grazed down to about 8 inches. Some of it a little shorter. But the point is, you see how, even though we have some height, we have no canopy. Well, I can see the ground in 90% of this field. And what that does, it really opens up your sunlight getting to the ground, which causes a lot of germination of both summer annuals, and then this fall we'll start to germinate some of your winter biennials. This is also, you want to manage a lot higher with a lot bigger canopy, particularly perennials like Bermuda grass. If your best bet with those, if you don't want them to express themselves, is to manage very high. They're a little bit of a shorter warm season, so they compete at the same time of the year with your bigger, taller natives. So keep them canopied over. So remove less of the growth, and then you can basically shade them out like the understory underneath trees. Also remember, as you graze, if sunlight's getting to the ground a large way, you'll start to encourage crabgrass, goosegrass, ragweed, horse nettles. Some of these are palatable, and I wouldn't really be concerned about them being there. You'll just graze them as you graze your field. But there are several that are unpalatable, and they can be very prolific seeders and really take advantage of an opportunity. That's kind of their life cycle, and their purpose in nature is to fill a void in a solar collector. They don't get this opportunity just every year, so they really take advantage of it, make a lot of seed, and put it in the seed bank in the soil. So you want to kind of learn to manage your native grasses higher. So we don't think much of the old rule of 8 inches. It's as a continuous management program. Not to say that you really hurt your native grass stand by grazed 8 inches, but you're going to cause a lot of encroachment of other species. So a question we frequently get is, what do I do if I've grazed too hard? So we're here in mid-June, and you can tell this is a stand of big blue stem here. It's well established, and we've really opened up the canopy. So we have grazed this severely for this video, and what I want to show you is, well, what do we do if we've grazed too hard? Okay, well, we took the livestock out of here about 5 days ago, and you can see we've got about 8 to 10 inches of regrowth. So we still have a healthy stand of big blue. It's not stunted, it's growing back nicely. The thing you need to do is you graze shorter. So like this, we grazed really short. We need to give this a really long rest period. And 45 days might be a minimum. We'll just kind of have to see how it responds here in June and what the weather does. But at 45 days, I would predict this stand of native grass to be back up between knee and pant pocket high, so in the 20-inch range. But it won't have a really full canopy yet. It'll still be a little, if you look down on it from the top, it'll still be a little sparse as far as blocking sunlight or collecting all the sunlight that's coming down. So my guess is we might stretch this out from 45 days to 55 days. And as your natives get going there, it doesn't sound like a lot longer rest period, but there'll be a point of change when you'll notice that you have achieved a canopy over the ground. And that'll happen really quickly. They grow vertical at first, and then as they start to fountain over with every bit of growth they put on after that, they'll canopy over pretty quickly. So that's what we would do. Is you graze hard, rest it longer. It's all about maintaining a good stand and a good canopy on your grass. Another aspect of this grazing short and resting longer, that's kind of a fix to get yourself out of a situation. It's not a management tool we would recommend. By that I mean, don't come in here year after year and graze it down really short like this and then let it grow back for a longer rest period. That will start to weaken your stand within 2 or 3 years of you managing in that style. So you definitely, it's not a problem that it happens once or twice, but you do want to curb that and get to managing things higher and let it'll work a lot better with your native warm season grass, and it's more the environment they want to be in. Same thing with annual weeds and encroachment of stuff. It's not going to ruin your stand right away, but if you keep doing it over time, you will get quite a buildup of these annual weeds, and they'll actually become competitive with your stand of warm season grass and reduce your production and their ability to regrow.
I remember the day my dad came into the office, and he'd been out moving the cows on some warm season grasses, and he said, "I've been thinking that there's 3 bites in a grass plant." And I said, "Oh yeah, Dad?" He said, "You know, a cow comes along, and what she does is she wraps her tongue around this and she takes off a bite. That's about 1/3 of our plant. If you leave her for a while longer, and she'll do that, take this 1 bite kind of off the field more or less. If you leave her for longer, she takes off another bite. And my bite wasn't very big here. She could have wrapped her tongue around more. And so this is about the 2nd third of the plant. This is about the bottom third. My thirds aren't very proportional here. But it really did, it stuck with me, this concept of like my plant in thirds. And she takes one bite, she takes the top third, she takes the second bite because you leave her longer. She takes that middle third, and if you leave her way, way too long, she takes that bottom bite and you're somewhere off down around ground level. That's really bad. Ideally, moving on when you take that top bite, and it kind of depends on how much forage do you have in front of you, when do you want to come back. So there's a lot of factors to think about in there of, do I want to take one bite? Do I want to take 2 bites? And you really never want to take 3 bites when the plant is green and growing. Now, I've added to my dad's thought just a little bit as I've been studying it. I think there's also a time when the plant is a little shorter that the cow really tends to take half of the plant. And that's just because of the plant height. She tends to wrap her tongue around a certain amount, and because that plant is shorter, that amount ends up being about half rather than a third. In which case, you want her to take 1 bite at that stage when you're at that stage of growth where it looks like she's taken half. You want her to take 1 bite. You sure don't want 2 bites because that took it off to the ground. So sometimes they take halves, sometimes they take it in thirds. But the concept being, really think about, you know, when am I coming back? How quick do I want to rotate back onto it? How much other forage do I have in front of me? Think about all of those factors that are helping you to make management decisions, and then monitor how many bites they're taking off the plant.
So another way to look at management of warm season grasses is it's a feel that you'll gather over time versus some hard and fast rules. But you know, in general, if you grazed it hard in the past, it takes a longer rest period. If you haven't grazed it as hard, then you could come back sooner and take more the second time. So it kind of becomes about feel and adapting your livestock grazing and your objectives that you have on your farm with the health of the plants. So to maintain a good healthy feel in native plants, we're here in a big blue stem field. We're here about June 12th, and as you can see, this native grass, it's tall. We're up to my belt buckle. We're 34 inches tall on a lot of it. We've grazed this several times this spring. We've grazed it 3 times already, and that's quite a bit. That's pretty short rotation. If you take April, May, and June, that means we've grazed it every 30 days or more frequently than that. But we're maintaining a nice canopy height. And the way I'm doing that is I am not grazing it very hard. When I put the livestock in here, we're only taking about a quarter of the growth off. And even though I started on April 15th and it was only that tall, I just took a bite off, as you've seen in some of our first videos. I just took a bite off and moved on. And then I come back and I grazed it a little bit more hard, and I took a bite off every plant in the field. Well, now we're the 3rd graze, we done virtually the same thing, and I'm ready to turn in livestock for a 4th graze. And this is kind of a pulse graze where I'm not really trying to remove all that much growth. I'm coming back quite frequently, but it's all about looking at your plants and deciding if they're healthy. I've got plenty of canopy in this field, as you can see behind me. I've got plenty of growth here, vegetation to eat. We're off to a good track to make a lot of production and get a lot of grazing days out of this. So if I had taken this down shorter, let's say, maybe my goal was, maybe I was short on grass early or whatever. Maybe I don't have a lot of warm season grass on my place and I left them a little too long. You know, you would adapt that by saying, well, if it looked too short, then you would want to rest it for longer, get it up to a good canopy height, and probably do some more controlled type grazing where you're able to remove an even amount of growth after that, because you will have you'd lower your growth points quite a bit if you had grazed it harder, making them want to lower it again and again. So you kind of would have to maintain that grazing height through your management, because the natural management system of the stemmy, prickly layer, it would be gone. The natives are very resistant to drought. They do quite well, but nothing is drought proof per se. So if it gets really dry early, or some years we have a really cool spring and it hasn't gotten warm enough and the native grasses kind of stay a little bit yellow and don't grow much early, you got to take all this into account as you monitor the health of your native grass and the other things that might affect it. So by taking those other things into account, you kind of get to adaptively graze and change your management to match your system. So that's just another theory on how to manage your native warm season grasses. Instead of using a calendar so much, go out and look at your fields.
Here at Hamilton Native Outpost, we know that mistakes happen. It seems they really happen when we either have nature involved, natural things involved, natural ecosystems, natural processes that we can't control, and people. And with grazing management, we've got both involved. So mistakes are going to happen when we're grazing, and really they're not mistakes. These grasses are not fragile. It's just that you can't keep repeating this over and over. So let's explore a little bit of what do I do if I've grazed it too short? What do I do if I've let it get too tall? Let's think about that. So first, let's think about what do I do if, like this grass, we've let it get a bit too tall and we should have started grazing it a couple weeks or more ago. And we've talked about the reasons why we don't want to let it get this big when we start. Reasons being productivity, we'll get a lot of knockdown. It's really going to hurt our production. Going to make it regrow slower, but then also the quality is going to be less because as the plant gets more mature, the protein level goes down. I guess from y'all's perspective, it would be like this. The protein level starts higher and then goes down. And the fiber, think of like woody content, you know, the stuff that makes it tough. Think of your tough asparagus. The fiber content goes up. So protein's going down, fiber's going up. That's a bad combination for quality of grass. So if we've let it get too tall, what do we do? In this case, just come graze it. It's not that tall. Big blue stem is the worst about the knockdown. But just get in here, graze it well, do the best you can, and move on. And then be ready to come back when it's ready and rested and recovered, which kind of depends on how much knockdown you actually end up getting. But if we've let it get even taller, and we're up in like July, what do? Well, we've already lost a lot of production, but there's no point in crying over spilled milk, as they say. And so we can just come in here and we could hay it. If the quality is still good enough to put up in a hay bale, we could cut it. There's a whole nother video to talk about how to cut hay successfully on native warm season grasses, because there's a few things different than what you're used to for other forages. So we could come in here and hay it. That'll start it over again. We could come in here and whatever you want to call it, whether you call it mob graze it, ultra high stock density graze it, whatever you want to call it, but let's stock it hard and heavy, get it kind of beat back. Maybe that's a bad terminology when we want our plants to stay healthy, but really they've got a lot of root reserves. And so let's come in here, the quality again, and this is still really good quality, but if we had waited even longer, the quality would be lower. And so the quality's not there that it could have been, but just come in, graze it off, get yourself started with a fresh, clean slate. It's kind of like haying it in effect. Okay, any other options? I guess we could also, especially if we're not needing this forage for the year, just chalk it up to a learned experience and let's just rest it for the rest of the summer. It can go to seed if, you know, sometimes things prevent it from going to seed, like poor weather or something like that, but let it just rest for the rest of the summer. There's no problem with that. And then you can, after dormancy, do a couple things. You can burn it. That'll really reinvigorate a stand. Native grasses are definitely built for fire. It was part of the ecosystem. Or you can winter graze it as well. Of course, anything in that dormant season, any warm season in the dormant season, the quality is way, way lower. And we would expect that out of something that's not green, but rather is kind of brown like toast. And so, but there's no reason you can't supplement some and graze it during the winter. Or if you've got the native cool seasons in there, you may have ready built your supplementation built into that because you've got the brown of the warm seasons in the winter and the green of those cool seasons. So if you've waited too long to start grazing, the world has not ended. Just live and learn from it. Either get out there and hay it, get out there and graze it hard, let it rest. Any of those solutions will be just fine. It's just a learning experience.
So if I had taken this down shorter, let's say, maybe my goal was maybe I was short on grass early, or whatever, maybe I don't have a lot of warm season grass on my place and I left them a little too long. You know, you would adapt that by saying, well, if it was looked too short, then you would want to rest it for longer, get it up to a good canopy height, and probably do some more controlled type grazing where you're able to remove an even amount of growth after that, because you will have reduced, you'd lower your growth points quite a bit if you had grazed it harder, making them want to lower it again and again. So you kind of would have to maintain that grazing height through your management, because the natural management system of the stemmy prickly layer, it would be gone. So as you do your grazing management, you kind of want to keep your native grasses in what we call Goldilocks land. Not too short. We want to keep a canopy and a little bit of we want to keep the solar collector full, but at the same time we don't want them so tall that we aren't removing enough growth to keep them vegetating. So kind of in between the two. And you'll get a feel for that as you go on through it. Also keep in mind that the annual weeds and whatnot can be quite competitive, and opening up the solar collector can sure encourage those in a big way. The other thing to keep in mind, it's not like these native grasses are really fragile or they die really easy. They just grow a lot different than the other grasses people are used to, and they need to be managed differently. They can take quite a bit of abuse, but they cannot take continual abuse over long periods of time. We really hope the information you find here is helpful, and we enjoy bringing it to you. If you like these videos, like us on Facebook, check us out on YouTube and our website.